So again, for those who have just joined us, we want to welcome you to the second in a webinar series that the National REACH Coalition is presenting. I am Charmaine Ruddock. I'm president of the National REACH Coalition. Today's webinar is brought to you by the National REACH Coalition, the University of Arizona Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health, the Arizona Telemedicine Program, and the Southwest Telehealth Center. Next slide. So again, on behalf of the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, HRSA, the Health Resource Services Administration, the National REACH Coalition, REACH grantees, students of University of Arizona, and all other participants, welcome. As we get started, we want to respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Udham and the Yaqui tribes. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Next slide. This session has DEI credit. The DEI credit registration applies only to the listed member there. If you can, please use your phone to be able to successfully register for this session. Next slide. So when you joined the webinar, your phone and/or your computer microphone was muted. The time is reserved at the end for Q&A. Please use the chat function to ask questions. Please fill out the post-webinar survey. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recordings will be posted on the website. Next slide. So this webinar that we're having here today is part of the series Changing the Paradigm, Who Tells Our Story, Shape Our Destiny. Today's webinar focuses on the African American community and the work to reclaim their story, their history, confronting oppressive structures, promoting and supporting the healing and resilience of the community. The outcome of this is a community that shapes and owns its own destiny. So for those who are not aware, the National REACH Coalition was founded in 2004, originally with REACH grantees of the CDC who were working on addressing racial and ethnic disparities across all racial and ethnic groups. The catalyst for this webinar, Who Tells Our Story, Shapes Our Destiny, came out of an epiphany experience that I had, but it's not unique to me. I was listening to a webinar where people not of nor from the community were presenting on work that was being done in communities of color. In other words, they were telling the community stories. Some presented as if they had the right to be the spokesperson for the community. As one of our panelists put it in a conversation we had yesterday, it was as if a ghostwriter had determined that the story they were writing on behalf of an author was actually their story instead of the author's. the community was relegated to something of a passive backdrop. Other presenters acknowledged that they were there working on behalf of the community and had been entrusted to share the story as the community had instructed. They showcased the community. And as I listened to that webinar, it struck me that this is something that we need to focus on, and it speaks to the history and origins of the National Reach Coalition, which in its formation had learned and decided that the communities that they were working in, their voices should be elevated, their voices should be part of the national conversation and efforts to address and eventually eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities. The other catalyst for this webinar series is a national discourse being had around topics such as critical race theory, the 1619 Project coming out of the New York Times effort, the Native American real history versus the history that has been told in so-called history books, told in Hollywood's movies. And more recently, we remember the story told by then presidential candidate Donald Trump when he was announcing his presidential campaign, where he described Mexicans as rapists, drug dealers, etc. And then we have quite recently Florida's current governor, who has determined that there are certain narratives that should not be told, and that he's exercising his power as governor to determine what gets told and what does not get told. The key to understanding this national discourse and their authors and loud voices is that it is to serve to control how those communities get perceived, and most importantly, how those communities perceive themselves and who shapes their future. That is, who tells our story shapes our destiny. It is with that context and that backdrop that I am thrilled and pleased at the panel of speakers we have with us today. I'll do a brief introduction of these speakers because the wealth of their experience, the work that they've been doing in this context of working to make sure the stories of the communities that they have been involved in is one that gets told as the communities want to tell their stories. So first, we have Stan Martin, who has a master's in management and who is the Buffalo office director and senior trainer for actually one of the current REACH grantees. He's a native son of Buffalo, New York, possesses over 20 years of experience in program planning, coordination, implementation of community initiatives focused on a variety of areas, namely tobacco control, chronic disease prevention, healthy eating, optimal adolescent health, vaccine hesitancy in historically oppressed and marginalized populations. Mr. Martin has years of experience and expertise developed in building the capacity of community stakeholders to address the social determinants of health, factor in their health outcomes, the utilization of community-based participatory research, collective impact, and population-based health strategies with the goal of promoting the systemic and policy change needed at every level of the socio-ecological model, which leads to the kind of transformation that we're all looking forward to as our goal. Welcome, Stan. Our next panelist, Kelly Evans, Program Manager at the Institute of Public Health Innovation, is an experienced problem solver who has proven outcomes within the education, housing, and healthcare systems. She is known widely for her ability to encourage, train, motivate stakeholders and staff in the community and across Virginia. She advocates strenuously on behalf of the most vulnerable populations across Virginia. She considers herself an out-of-the-box thinker, thrives on building confidence and camaraderie among those she interacts with. Kelly has a Master's of Healthcare Administration. Our third panelist, Marcel, is currently pursuing a dual degree in mathematics and psychology at the University of Arizona. He's an EMT who worked on the front lines of the COVID pandemic in California, testing people for COVID. He has set as his future goal to become a psychiatrist. Wanting to be an MD has been a lifelong dream. However, an almost catastrophic life event that almost cost him his life led him to choose psychiatry as an area he wants to specialize in. His intent is to help people gain a better mental health mindset to avoid going through some of the life traumas that he knows of personally and that others have experienced. And our fourth panelist is Patrick McNeal. He's a director of the North Flint Neighborhood Action Council that brings residents, school leaders, and community stakeholders together in some of the most economically disenfranchised areas of Flint, Michigan. Their intent is to plan, implement, and sustain comprehensive revitalization efforts that improve the lives of residents and provide them with the loudest voice in that change, helping them remember nothing about us without us. He's a lead facilitator, certified life coach of community roots, and has long been an advocate that helps individual community groups, churches, nonprofits identify and engage with poverty, access, and racial reconciliation efforts. He's also a certified digital storyteller and trainer that got his training through the Story Center. And he's utilized the gifts of storytelling to assist individuals and groups in sharing their stories using their voices. Patrick has earned both a master's in educational leadership from Eastern Michigan University and a Master of Divinity from Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia. On behalf of everybody, I want to thank the panelists. We are going to have an exciting conversation discussion, I know it. So first, I'm going to ask Stan to briefly introduce himself, talk about the community he has been working with and represents. Stan.
Thank you, Charmaine, and I'd also like to thank the National Reach Coalition and this distinguished panel of allowing me the opportunity to share my experience with you all and be with you all here this afternoon. As you mentioned earlier in my bio, I'm a native son of Buffalo, New York. I moved back to Buffalo about 4 years ago after working in New York City and also internationally in Toronto on a number of different health initiatives. And the community that I grew up in, I thought it was worthwhile, important for me to move back because there was a renaissance taking place. There was a revitalization taking place that as a result of gentrification, many people who looked like me were left behind. So I was very fortunate to move back home and bring back valuable resources and identify new resources to address the inequities and the health disparities that exist among the African-American and those who identify with the Black diaspora here in the city of Buffalo, New York. The area that I service, to give you, not to take away too much, but to give you an idea, the area that our program services, predominantly African-American, Black, as I mentioned earlier. And I would like to say that the life expectancy of those who reside in the zip code areas that we are focused on, the priority population, the life expectancy is 10 to 12 years less than those who live outside of that community, in particular whites. So that's why I felt it was very, very important for me to come back home, but also importantly to bring valuable resources and to do this work in the place in the city that I grew up in. I still have family and friends here today.
Thank you, Stan. Next, we're going to have Kelly.
Great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on today. I am Kelly Evans. I actually am born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, but I currently reside in Petersburg, Virginia, which is about 20 minutes away, and Richmond being the capital. And so it's interesting when you think about those that I serve. I actually, Denise will place it in the chat around, I work with the Southside Trauma Informed Network, where we talked about building a resilient city as it relates to Petersburg. Also during that time, I worked with the Crater Area Health District that actually presented some on a weekly basis. Dr. Alton Hart would present with Virginia State as it relates to ensuring that people were aware of COVID. And so it was actually interactive with the community, and various people attended the conversation. And so within that community, there are great aspects to consider. As Stan talked about his area, it's interesting because in Petersburg, when you think about health challenges, we are on the actual index, I believe the number, and I would have to research the actual information, but we would be considered like 146 out of 146. And so when you think about social determinants of health and some of the greater issues going on within the city of Petersburg, there's great concern to help educate the community, as well as ensure we engage with the faith-based community and ensure all disciplines are interacting cohesively together, because many times we intersect with one another, but then sometimes tend to work in silos. And so I am that person who you will say, oh my gosh, why is she so excited? I wake up like this. Because in my mind, I think there's an opportunity of many people will share doom and gloom, but how about every day I'm grateful for the opportunity to just smile at somebody, which could cause a conversation. And I think the dynamics of being here today, I always have the opportunity to say, at first, I was a voice for the voiceless. Now I get to pass the mic, because guess what? Everybody's voice needs to be elevated and heard as it relates to what's going on in the city of Petersburg, as well as the state of Virginia.
Thank you, Kelly. Next, Marcel, ask you to introduce yourself and talk briefly about the community that you work in, have represented. Marcel.
Hello, my name is Marcel Clark. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. If I have to think what group I represent, it's the students who were affected during COVID. I was an EMT in the early 2020s. I graduated from Miramar College, and I was getting letters about what's going on with COVID. And it was a little scary, just the fact that I was just a new EMT, and I would see reports from my county, you need to wash your hands, got to wear a mask. And it started very optimistic. But then from January to March, it started to become, if we will, apocalyptic. They were saying, love your family, hug them, because we don't know what's going on. And then while working with COVID, I still saw the same things over and over again that was affected by me. It was people who didn't know how to deal with anxiety, locked indoors all day. And I noticed that a lot of people, especially in my community of students and young Black Americans, we don't know what to do with ourselves if we don't have our friends. And that's a big issue with mental problems, because if we're not able to express ourselves, either going out with our friends or our music, which was mine, or even going to the gym, which is another one of my hobbies, we kind of break down mentally. But luckily, because of my accident when I was in my early teen or my late teens, when I was 18, I was able to overcome to say that it's going to take some time, but we'll eventually get over this, which is what I want to do now when I become a psychiatrist, is teach people that although it seems dark, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcel. Patrick, introduce yourself and briefly about the community and the work you've been doing.
Sure. Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you, National Reach Coalition, my other panelists, and with you all on this call. Patrick McNeal, native son of Flint, Michigan, born and raised here, and no, I'm still not drinking the water. One of the things that happens when you lose voice, or when you've never had voice, it dictates how people treat you. and how those things continue to come to pass. One of the things that bothers me yet to this day, I wish Flint had gentrification. I guess we haven't hit rock bottom enough for people to want to move here. Or maybe it's the water, I'm not sure. But the idea is we were once per capita the highest median income place for people who did not have a college education. Just imagine what that did. We were roughly somewhere around over 200,000 people. Money was flowing. General Motors, who we call Generous Motors, was doing what it do. People were literally working full-time jobs and not graduating from high school. So we have people who were 46 who had did 30 years in the shop. And then all of a sudden it happened. The 70s happened, and then all of a sudden the trend began to happen. And so those years where we were highly invested, we went from 80,000 General Motor workers in our county to 8. And I want y'all to think about that. That takes a toll on the community. But the resilience of the people of Flint has always been remarkable to me because they didn't leave. They had set their roots here, they had raised their families here, and they decided to stay here. And so what happens with 20, 30, 40 years of disinvestment? No one wants to hear your voice, and neither does anyone want to know your name. And sooner or later, you begin to get gun shy. And so you quit talking. You quit speaking, and you allow them people down there to do whatever they're going to do. And so it's my job in the work that I do now is to give voice to the voiceless and audibility to the hearing impaired. How do we begin to let residents know that they are and should be honored, and let this city know that there are people who want to work with you to make this a viable option? And so that's what we do. That's why I'm here, because I recognize that silence cannot be our option. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So we've passed through, wow, hard to believe, 3 years. And in years, we heard the story of COVID and how it was impacting different communities of color, told by many folks. And so I want to start off our conversation this afternoon, asking you to respond to the question of, first, did your community find that their experience of COVID was being told by others in a way that did not reflect the experience that they had of it? And Stan, I'm going to ask you to kick off response to this question.
I would say yes. I would say that that echoed the sentiments of, being left behind, being forgotten. And therefore, when COVID first hit, the community, we were not recognized as a priority population, the African American and Black community. We did not have access to not only information, but also access to vaccination, and therefore, I think that led to that belief that it was always affecting someone else. A lot of myths, a lot of fiction, so to speak. So I think that ideology, when COVID first hit, came out, that was the perception. And then as time went on, we started to see the data. We started to look at the science, but we didn't need data. We didn't need science. We could look at who wasn't at the dinner table. We could look at, who was in the hospital alone, who wasn't picking up the phone. So it then began, to really look at for ourselves, who was missing, who aren't we hearing from? And not only that, what are we going to do about it? So, and I think that's where, the community actually began to take charge and control the narrative themselves.
So I'm going to follow up with you before I go to others and ask you, in what way did the community reclaim that narrative of their COVID experience? And if so, how did they do it?
Yes, excellent question. The community actually mobilized itself, a diverse group of African Americans and those identified with the Black diaspora. It was the faith community. It was also people who drove the bus, also people who was on the front line working in hospitals, EMTs like Marcel themselves, who actually said that, wait a moment, we can't wait on someone else to come and save us. We can't wait on someone else, to promote our narrative. So what happened was the community decided, that we would own our own narrative by utilizing our own our own imagery to promote vaccine messages that are reflective of and dispel the myths like the Tuskegee, experiment, or, other misinformation that was out there that really created, hesitancy surrounding vaccination. So we launched an aggressive campaign to utilize our own imagery of our own African Americans and trusted messengers from the community, in the messaging, door-to-door flyers, and also work very closely with our local, now I have to say, at our local Black-owned newspapers and one Black-owned radio station to really start to disseminate key messages that could impact change.
Thank you, Stan. Marcel, I'm going to go to you next. Given the work that you did as an EMT work, and ask you the first question. Did you find that the community in which you worked or the community you belong to, that their experience of COVID was being told by others in a way that did not reflect the experiences that they were having?
Oh, absolutely. We've always had this image that us and the first responder knew what we were doing. And when people would get news out, they would hear, you have to wash your hands. And they would say, oh, of course, you should wash your hands, but people don't. And there's a certain way you have to wash your hands that people don't know how. You have to take your hands, scrub them, make sure your fingernails, and drip the water into the bowl. And every time I would hear people chastise us EMTs, nurses, and doctors saying that we're not doing much. But if I was able to show you the letters I was getting from the county, it was one day we do this, another day we do that. And burnout was real. I worked, 40, 50-hour weeks at the end of, 2020. And at some point, I was just fed up saying, this is enough. They're not paying us enough. I'm risking everything. I wasn't given the right tools. So when we were working, we had to wear a face mask, N95, gloves. And some days we didn't have them. Some days we had to reuse them. And then people would tell us, oh, we're not doing enough. You should do more to stop the spread. We can only do so much with the things we're given. And it was really hard and disheartening to hear that the people we're trying to protect, by going out, sacrificing our health and maybe even time with our family, knowing that this could be the end, and kind of treated, worse than anything. It was really disheartening, but you had to push through knowing that you are helping the community. But at some times we all sat there go, why should we do this if they're just going to yell at us as if it's our fault?
Interesting. Thank you, Marcel. Kelly, same question to you. Did your community find that what they were experiencing of COVID was not being told by others the way they were experiencing it? And if that was the case, what did the community do to reclaim the narrative of their COVID experience as opposed to others that were shaping a different narrative?
Great question, Charmaine. It's interesting because you think about Marcel watching okay.
We're having a little Kelly, we're having a little sound problem with you. Start again and let's see how it's going. Go ahead, Kelly. Let's see if it improves.
Okay. I said when Marcel talked about washing hands, it made me realize, I said, didn't we learn this in kindergarten? So in my mind, I was just thinking about where are we and what are we doing? And then when we would get information in Petersburg, I kept saying, is this the correct information we're getting? Because we would hear it from so many different mediums, and whether it be TV or radio or paper or word of mouth. And then sometimes it was almost as if people were playing telephone, meaning someone had the information, but then they heard it differently from how it was originally shared. And so in my mind, I kept saying, what's really happening for us to receive the vaccinations? How is information being disseminated? And so I was out in the community, and I actually volunteered with the health department to offer vaccinations, because people were, as Stan talked about, looking at it saying, I'm not getting that. I'm not doing that. I'm not for certain if I should do that. Did you check with somebody else to see if they did it? And it's almost as if they were kind of like sitting on the front porch having conversations. But the reality of it is, we know ultimately people were passing away and losing loved ones. And so it was very important for myself and the rest of the community to kind of come alongside to help educate people on the benefits of the vaccination, how to get vaccinated, even when you think about seniors and their level of isolation, and many that could not get to the vaccination point where what we had it at a school and we had it at the local college. But many times that was taken into consideration also. But immediately the local health department, along with in the Crater area, along with others that are boots on the ground, were able to help change the narrative about the importance of the vaccination and having a clear understanding of if there's a question you may have. As a volunteer, we were trained to be able to answer those questions and to be able to kind of ease people's sense of, okay, you've washed your hands, you've done this. Okay, now you have the vaccination. Do you need to get a second, the booster? But then having a clear understanding of where people are and demystifying the myth around we all gonna die. Because I think many times people were saying, oh my gosh, I think I have these underlying issues, but how about we help to educate people on ensuring that the information is given out correctly and promptly?
Thank you, Kelly. Patrick, Flint has had a lot of people tell a lot of stories about Flint that looked quite different from the story Flint folks would tell about their experience. Did that happen with COVID?
Absolutely. So let me just give my take on narrative, right? Narratives are not set in days and months. Narratives are set in years and decades and generations. And these narratives that we've been dealing with, where we don't trust the medical profession, were just not something that just got dropped off the other day. There's a thought that there's an idea called prudent paranoia, that you got a reason that you really need to think about what some people believe because it didn't happen to you before. It didn't happen to people like us before. And then all of a sudden, it hasn't been that long since Tuskegee, y'all. I know it looks like it's been a while, but it hasn't been. There are people who remember. It has not been that long when AIDS and HIV was out there, and we were given this information. And so you have to forgive some people, and specifically in my context, the African-American community, if we trod slowly when it comes to information given to us. Now, the one thing we know for sure is that COVID was made specifically for us, because every disease that we're a leader in, COVID loved to eat. Chronic heart disease, asthma, we had breathing problems, and others, kidney disease, made us way more susceptible to COVID than others. Well, people knew that we had issues, but they never came to try to relieve those issues, which made us also not believe that there was a lot of concern for what our community was going through. Now saying all that, y'all, because I like to make sure I set the table correctly, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up people like Dr. Fur Holden or Yvonne Lewis or Tanya French Turner and those folks who put together a group of trusted voices who looked like the community they was trying to speak to, and to try to raise our awareness by having weekly webinars on what we could consider to be truth. There were other opportunities and funding that came down where we were trying to find trusted voices for our community and to try to lift them up and help them to not get vaccinated, but to deal with at least the misinformation and the disinformation so that you can make the best quality decision for you. And so while, yes, I believe that there were some issues going on, there's still issues going on yet even today as it pertains to us trusting the medical profession. And there's data to back up why it may not be prudent for us to just believe because they said it. Something has to change. Something has to.
Thank you, Patrick. Patrick, I'm going to stay with you as we broaden out our conversation beyond just a focus on COVID and ask you something, let's just go dive right into an issue for the African-American community, and it is this. How has the history of racism distorted your community's story? And how has this distortion impacted the health and well-being of your community?
Since 1619, we've been marginalized. So we have to start with the reality of our situation. We were never thought of as human. We were thought of as property. And we do believe that there was a time when Black people and white people married. And it was way before 1619. I mean, it was way before people thought about it. It was when Virginia was truly a commonwealth, but owned by Britain. And then all of a sudden, Bacon's Rebellion happened when the workers rose up and began to say that, hey, look, something has to change. And then this construct was put into place called race, so that you told the white peasant it was better for him to be with the white landowners, even though the white landowners didn't see themselves as white, they saw themselves as wealthy. But it was easier for them to lock together and to move. So how does this impact our care? Because America still has never dealt with her original sin, right? Let's go. Let's just walk forward, y'all. Let's go. And then we get to the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, we know that it wasn't in Lincoln's first instance to give freedom to slaves, because he thought it would destroy the Union. So again, we became a bargaining chip. Let's keep going down the street. Then all of a sudden we can talk about reparations, not the ones that the African Americans never received, but reparations given to slave owners who lost their slaves. And let's just keep rolling this thing forward. And as we go forward, we were promised 40 acres and a mule, but all of a sudden we didn't get 40 acres, we didn't get a mule. So the history of this country is one of overpromising and underdelivering. As it pertains to health in its own right, it doesn't even matter when we make it, when we're successful, because all you have to look at is the maternal health and how Black women, regardless of economic strata, have the same problem when they go to the doctor. They lose their children at the same mark as poor folks when they have better health care. So it's something missing there. It's something, and the only thing I can think of is there's a lack of empathy for people who look like me. There's a lack of empathy. But look, we want the same thing as everyone else. We want safe communities. We want to raise our children. We want to help them to have more than what we have. We want them to stay out of trouble. And we just want them to prosper and do what is in their heart to do. But for me to tell my sons and my daughters that there's a thing called fair, I would be lying to them. Because there is no fairness in what happens to us. There's no fairness that I have to tell my son, listen, man, if you get pulled over, stick your hands out the window. Don't touch nothing. Let them tell you what to do. Call him yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. Get home. We'll deal with the other stuff later. Just get home. And that's what our predicament is. So until our brothers and sisters who don't look like us begin to see us in our full humanity, some of the changes that we desire and we want to have happen in this country, I'll just use the words of Martin Luther King. Why don't you stand up for the piece of paper that you got on deck? If you stand up, if you believe in that Constitution, treat us as if we fully have access in that Constitution.
Thank you, Patrick. Stan, I have to go to you next because just a few months ago, last year in 2022, Buffalo suffered a horrific massacre that was directly tied to racism, as was clear from the person who perpetrated that mass murder in what they had written about their plan and their actions to go to Buffalo. They singled out the area they went to because of the race of the people there. So Stan, same question to you. How has the history of racism distorted your community's story? And how has this impacted your community's health and well-being?
Yes, thank you, Charmaine. I appreciate the question. And I want to just lay some context in case people aren't familiar. The city of Buffalo, Western New York, we're the last stop on the Underground Railroad. Okay, and you know, when those who were enslaved escaped from the South and came north, you know, they were seeking to cross over, you know, into Canada for a better way of life, better way of living. And what we're trying to do in our geographical area is to bring that liberation back across our community, you know, whereas though I mentioned some of the health disparities and inequities that exist and focus on what's strong, not necessarily what's wrong. Fast forwarding that, you know, as you mentioned, an individual got in their car and drove 3 hours or more specifically to a city that is racially and socioeconomically divided and targeted and killed people out of hate. And, you know, historically, that has been, you know, the narrative in terms of, as my brother Patrick was saying, that, you know, we're considered less than human, you know, as chattel. And when he took the lives of those individuals within that supermarket, those were my friends. Those were some of my family members who were on their way to the store. Those were our community vaccine champions who were out there trying to educate and increase awareness, who were doing the work, the boots on the ground, as Kelly mentioned. You know, they were trusted members of this community. They were elders. They were someone's mother, father, uncle, sons that I have relationships with. And when that happened, you know, that created even more trauma on a community that has been marginalized and traumatized for years. And when we're talking about telling the story, it was very important for us to tell our own story because residents in the community look to our community vaccine champions who were in that store and some who were working in other spaces on the REACH grant, and said, who are these individuals? Who are these organizations? Because if you saw on CNN the overflow of resources, they were not from this community. They hadn't been there. And we knew that when it was all said and done, that they were gone. So the community looked to us, looked to each other and say, who are they? Where did they come from? Can we trust them? Mm-hmm. You know, and that has a profound effect in terms of making sure when we're amplifying the voices of the community that we're telling the whole story. You know, that we're telling, you know, our story and being mindful of who the messenger is. Mm-hmm. Because I tell you right now, CNN is not here. Fox isn't here. You know, those other, you know, media outlets are gone. And we're left to deal with the trauma still, on top of COVID and other, you know, health disparities, chronic disease, illnesses, what have you. So it still perpetuates itself today, systemically and institutionally.
Stan, bear with me a minute while I stay with you and ask you a follow-up question. Has your communities begun to ensure that the authentic story of their experience is not only being told now, but will continue to be told as the community wants it in the future?
Absolutely. One of the things that we saw galvanize come together was the mobilization of Black-owned businesses, you know, retailers, the Center of Black Health and Equity, you know, looking at, you know, how we can not only create change at the individual level, but also within dismantling systemic and institutional racism, so that even if it takes the boycotting, you know, recognizing the power of our dollar, our finances, you know, that we are able to then really amplify, you know, our self-efficacy and our power, and be the protagonists in terms of telling our stories ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stan. Marcel, do you want to speak as a very young person? Speak to the question of racism and its distortion of the African American story and the impact, as you see it, on your community's health and well-being.
Well, I can start. I remember first experiencing racism where I was in preschool. I was told I couldn't hang out with a certain person because I was Black. They, you know, wouldn't allow me to play, I think it was soccer. And then in third grade, I was told by my teacher that I'm going to die in a ditch because I was Black. And I know for some people who didn't have the resilience or backing I had, that made them drop out of school. I have countless friends who, unfortunately, their father wasn't in their lives, that ended up basically on the streets or in jail. So when I hear people say racism doesn't affect people, and I say it does, because there are people out there that see your skin color and will automatically treat you different. I even have a hard time as not only just a Black person, but a mixed Black person. So now I get hate from one side and another and everyone else because they assume that I need to act a certain way. And it's always been very stressful, and especially in my community, because I was if you will, a military brat, a person who grew up with people all around the world. And we saw it all the time. We would hang out, people would treat one person different, but say hi to another. And it was always the same for me, no matter what group I was in. I was always just the Black kid. And growing up, I didn't really have any role models. All my family members were unsuccessful or didn't go to college. So when I first started going to college, it was really difficult to, you know, find yourself. Everyone talked about, you know, imagine yourself in college, but I didn't see any brown faces. I only saw whites, Asians, some males, females, but never the Black guy who's in STEM, trying to make a difference. And it was very difficult and sometimes demotivating to think, how am I going to make it in this if I don't see my face? But then that made me realize that if I give up, I'll be similar to everyone else, saying that, look at him, another failed Black kid who fell out of college, another statistic. So instead, what pushes me forward is the idea that I'll be the face, hopefully, for some Black kid in the future who sees that's Dr. Clark. He went to U of A, he went to Banner Medical. He's the reason I keep doing this. And sometimes with racism, it isn't a battle, if you will, or a sprint. It's a marathon. It's a war. And some battles you lose, some battles you win. But as long as we keep really pushing forward and knowing that one day maybe we'll be able to come together, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really difficult, especially some people who, if you will, just always have hate in their heart. But the one thing that makes me know that we'll get there one day was a picture I saw that really motivated me, a medical doctor. It was a KKK member who got shot, and he was treated by nothing but Black doctors. It was, I believe, in Alabama. And the doctors asked, why didn't you, let him die? You would be perfectly justified to let this man die. And most of them said it was their duty. Others said, he was our patient. But they all said, well, if I let him die, what message am I sending? That I'm just going to perpetuate this war? We need to do better. We also need to be better. And sometimes that means, hey, if someone wants to, be racist, we talk to them. If they don't want to change, we try to change someone else's mind. Why try to fight a losing war when we can go change someone else's mind?
Thank you, Marcel. Great insight. Kelly, you have been in the business, the work of making sure that the community you're a part of is reclaiming their story. How did the process of reclaiming the story impact reclaiming their power?
Charmaine, that's an interesting question, because one thing that I have come to learn by the use of reflective listening, most people say, nobody's listening to me. They're not trying to hear what I have to say. But guess what? I am intentional of what everybody in the community has to say. On my LinkedIn page, and I think my page, it talks about being a reflective listener. Because if I'm already solution driven, I'm not allowing person or the individual to be a part of the story. And so as I think about the community that I'm a part of and how I am here to assist and serve them, I see them from an asset-based mindset. And so everyone has a story to tell, and everyone has something, whether it's years ago or up until now. When I think about Marcel telling the story, there should not be a generational divide amongst young versus old. There should be an integration of our older people sharing with younger people to hear the difference and the dynamics of how we can grow and develop together. Because I think at the end of the day, the solution is not resting upon the older people, it's resting upon all people. And I think when we can come together as a collective voice, it will give us a better understanding of my agenda may look a little bit different. But if we can have one agenda and one action item, we can at least move forward. And I know in the city of Petersburg, there's ongoing conversations, whether it be faith-based community, whether it's at the local coffee shop. I think people are coming together to look at thoughts and ideas to at least try to bring together a cohesiveness around how we address individuals, not just saying we're supposed to be concerned about the young population. Oh, we should be concerned about seniors. The African-American woman, I am about all people. And so whether we're talking about our babies in elementary school, whether we're talking about the single parent, whether we're talking about the seniors at the senior high rise, or every individual involved, it's an opportunity for us to come together in the city of Petersburg to grow and develop. Because I always say, as a city grows, the state grows. And so when we think about Petersburg and what's happening, I always say Petersburg is ripe for growth, because the average person will say, well, who wants to live in Petersburg? I do. And so I will tell people, yeah, I live in Petersburg, born and raised in Richmond, but I live in Petersburg. I enjoy the walking space. I enjoy communicating with people. I enjoy smiling at people. Most people are saying, why are you always happy? Why should I not be? And so a smile can start a conversation. Because people will look at you and say, why is she smiling at me? And I'll smile right back. And that can begin the conversation. Can ultimately can hear about what people's needs are. And that person, that's the networker. So if you say you get an immediate need, in my mind, after I hear what you said, I say, oh, let me connect you with this person. They'll be able to help you. Oh, you need this resource? Let me send you over this person. Oh, right now you need some food. I can send you to get some food and get resources. You got some health concerns going on? I know exactly who you need to talk to. I'm the person. I may be 52 years young, but I'm almost like big mama or auntie, because you're going to be able to come to me and say, this is what you need. And Kelly, whether you call me Sister Kelly, whether you call me Kelly, whether you call me Kelly, is going to be able to navigate into the right space to where at the end of the day, after the transaction, I've developed a relationship.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Patrick, how do the stories help communities confront oppressive structures?
We've been remember, there was a time when we weren't even allowed to read. So we had to tell the story. And our oral tradition is all we held on to. And so the stories mostly came down through oral traditions, those adages, those mother wit things that people say that they carried us. And now we get the opportunity to define what we want to see and what we want to look like. And the beauty of telling your story in your voice is that it's therapeutic to you. There's some hesitancy in the Black community as it pertains to mental health. And sometimes what you have to do is you have to come at it in a way that most people wouldn't look at it. So if you're in a group and you're telling your story, you don't realize that it's healing you as much as it's healing the people that you're sharing your stories with. So by just sharing what happened, because we did lose a lot of people to COVID, and how do you manage trauma? Well, if you have to do something with it, and we hope you do something constructive versus destructive. And so I've watched my community just begin to talk and to share. I've watched them speak their truth, tell their truth in a manner that people could understand it and stand with it. And so, and it's beautiful, because one of the things in our effort to try to get people to find out who the trusted voices were, they didn't understand the power that they held. And so the story is the power. It's your truth. And it should be done with I statements. I believe this. And that's the only thing we hold on to, because if my parents could go through what they went through and their parents could go through what they went through, then I need to be able to hold on just a little while too. I like to tell stories because stories say it better than me sometimes. I remember the old mothers of the church used to ask you a question when they saw you. And I ain't talking about at church. I'm talking about in community. They would say, baby, you holding on? And when you see them, yes, mother, I'm holding on. Well, baby, you keep on holding on. Now, I don't know what holding on means for other people, but for my context and my spirit, it meant just keep on fighting the good fight. Keep on doing the right thing. Keep on believing that one day, and I know that I keep bringing up references to Dr. King because we just celebrated him a few weeks ago, that he began to share that when he gave his last speech in Memphis. He began to talk about this idea that he knew that he may not get there with us, but he said he saw the promised land and that we would get there. And so my hope is that I stay hopeful that the stories can hold us so our reality can get us there.
Thank you, Patrick. Sten, same question to you. How do the stories help communities confront the oppressive structures that they battle with and that challenge them?
Yes, it's paramount. It's a part of the healing, that when you're able to share your experience, or you can share, your story, based upon, what has happened to you. I think what I've seen and witnessed and been a part of that, that's taking back the power. You're no longer a victim. You're no longer surviving. You're on the road to thriving. And that's something that I believe that the community, has embraced, and the power of sharing their testimonials. You find out that, hey, I felt this way too. I experienced that as well. Oh, you went through that? It's those shared experiences that now create, or where the healing begins, and I'm seeing, in terms of mental health in particular, in our community, that was taboo. That was like something that we don't talk about, we don't discuss. That already happened to someone else or somewhere else. Now it's the norm is changing. Say, I need help. I need to talk to someone, or can you provide me with some services or what have you. So we're changing the norm, and as we're changing the norm, that's taking back the power and healing, and moving forward in a constructive way. So thank you for the question.
Stan, I'm gonna stay with you a little, because I want to ask you a follow-up question. How will the communities ensure that they continue to control the narrative in an environment, in a nation that is trying to silence their stories?
Yes.
And we know nationally there is an active effort across the country to silence their stories. So how do the communities, how the community that you're very much a part of, control that narrative in such an environment?
Yeah, residents themselves are activated to be a part of, whether it's school boards, whether it's looking at the curriculum within schools and holding those accountable in terms of those in decision-making power, in terms of not only what's delivered, but how it's delivered, in those spaces, when it comes to critical race theory and, things of that nature. Also, our trusted residents are working with other share-minded organizations or like-minded organizations that have a mission to really amplify, community voice. Like I mentioned earlier, the Buffalo Center Health Equity, those decision makers who have real power and influence, that can, create, or that can hold, organizations and individuals accountable, a watch board, So I think that our community mobilization structure, with is community led by residents, that is a way that we're seeking to not only hold people accountable, but to activate other forces, others, to be involved at any level, whether you're a stakeholder or a decision maker, or a taxpayer, or you own your own barbershop, at every level, there's different levels of engagement, of involvement.
Thank you, Stan. I just want to remind folks, Denise, hopefully somebody is monitoring the chat if people are putting questions in the chat. Just a reminder that we'd love to have some questions from those who are watching, for the panelists if they have them. Kelly, how do you talk about the history of your community's stories, especially if they've been co-opted and told by others?
Charmaine, as I am slowly but surely looking at the history of Petersburg, and it's funny, this morning I had breakfast with someone and was talking about, I believe that in Petersburg, there were a lot of wars happening. And I know many times within the African-American community, back then, people were a part of fighting the war, but were not really identified as active participants in the war. And so when we come all the way to 2023, I think about there is still a war going on as it relates to race and poverty. And so when you think about capturing that story and then having the ability to really look back at history and then bring that forward, how do we actively engage in changing that narrative? And I think the empowerment comes through the people. But I think many times people may say, well, I'm really not trying to hear all of that. But I think the reality of it is we need to hear it. It's almost as if facing the elephant in the room. The elephant will always be there if people are not having those hard conversations. And I think sometimes people will say that's pushback, or you're just being a little rebellious, or you're just in disagreement. No, it's the reality of how do we change the narrative to where it's one of health and wholeness for every individual within the Black and Brown community. Because at the end of the day, I think about if you were homeless, or if you were facing eviction, or if you had overwhelming health disparities. And in this day and time, I still ask myself, how did we get here? Yeah, we know that people will say eat the right foods and it will lower your A1C3, or go ahead and if you get provided this, it'll do this. But how, if it's not coming from another African-American in the community that may be well-known or well-respected, people are kind of saying, I really don't want to, I'm not going to engage in that conversation, or I don't think that's beneficial to me. But at the end of the day, if you hear it from a trusted resource, are you willing to utilize that information? And I think sometimes people are hearing stuff, but then they're saying, I don't know if I really trust that. And I think it's an opportunity to really lean into those conversations where you may be touched, but ultimately it will help in the healingness of that individual as well as the community. Because at the end of the day, it's one develop, it's an opportunity to say, you know, that wasn't pushback. I need to grow and develop in that area. How do I challenge myself and then challenge others within the community to really come together collectively to say, through my growth and experience, I know you too can grow and move into this place of experience another level of healing and wholeness as an individual and as the community.
Hey, Charmaine, I just want to jump in right here and just say something.
Absolutely.
These conversations don't happen automatically. They're not natural. They're not a natural, because in naturality, when we have those conversations, we normally get to pointing our finger at somebody, right? So these conversations have to be carefully curated, right? They have to be carefully curated conversations with people who understand the idea of how do you have conversations where you can disarm people so that when they come to the space, you first have to figure out a way to know what someone's humanity is. And then once you know their humanity, you can have a more difficult conversation because you have some relational capital in the work. Some of this is done. I don't know how many people are familiar with truth, racial healing, and transformation work. In those healing circles, they do some of that work. I know we do some of that work inside of our courageous conversations on race, racism, and radical change. And we've done these conversations with people. If I had to, I won't go to political parties because that's too easy. If you lean left, I didn't have the conversation over there. And if you lean right, I didn't have the conversation over there. And what I found out is that if you set the table the right way and people understand that you're not there to beat them up, but that you're there to just try to find some commonality, that you can have those difficult discussions with people who might have came there and thought they were getting ready to get into a fight, but a fight just didn't take place. Authentic conversation did, which is listening, speaking, listening, speaking.
Is there anything else in terms of how you set the table the right way, Patrick?
Again, that's why I just said it has to be curated. It has to have people who have to come in the room have to have the intent that that's why they're there. They're there to create a space so that people can have a dialogue about difficult topics and difficult things. And so I say it like this. Everybody can't play basketball. Everybody can't play football. Everybody can't do this. Everybody can't curate a safe place for conversations. It's a special gift that some people have. Some people might have been taught. For other people, it was just caught. And so it's something that comes, but when you have it, you know it's there. And what I say when it happens, because there's some real thought that go into this, but I call it magic. You know when the magic has happened. when someone who starts off being the most impacted or the one who's given the most vitriol becomes the one who becomes your lead spokesperson on why other people need to go through this process. So I don't want to make it seem like everybody can do it. I just know that there's some people in this country and some people who are in this room right now who could work that room and really begin to bring about impactful change that could literally lead to us getting to a space that I never thought I would see. And again, y'all, I'm in my MLK mode that people would judge me by the content of my character and not the color of my skin.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Denise or anybody else who's monitoring the chat, are there any questions in the chat for the panelists?
It looks like we just have a lot of great comments that are coming into the chat. I don't see any specific questions at the moment, Charmaine.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you for monitoring it and letting me know. So we're coming close to ending what is a fabulous, deeply informative discussion. And I'm going to ask folks to respond to this question. There may be one or two others, but this question. How in your experience is your community using their experience over the last 3 years to understand the critical importance of maintaining control over their narrative? What lessons have your community learned in that respect to move forward so they are the ones owning and telling their story? Whoever wants to take the first shot at it, please go ahead. So again, the question, how's your community using their experience over the last 3+ years to understand the critical importance of maintaining control over their narrative, over their story? And what lessons would you say have been learned to move that control forward so they're the ones owning and telling their story?
I'll take the first. Oh, you got it. Go ahead, Stan. You get it. You get it, Stan. You rob. Stan. You rob this train. I'll catch the next one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Stan, I'm going to use the moderator's right to add. So say you go ahead, Stan.
Okay, here we go. I would say that one of the lessons learned, and I think someone mentioned this earlier, or maybe myself, the messenger is just as important as the messenger. The messenger is just as important as the message, if not more important. And what we learned was that, having once again, our trusted community vaccine champions, also having our Black physicians, we call them MVPs, having them share their testimonials about what they're seeing on the front line and also their personal experiences, and capturing that in social media, capturing those imagery, whether it's in print or other products, other materials, is so powerful because now, when we talk about historical trauma, when we talk about we don't trust or believe that the health system, it has our best interests. Now we have someone who looks like us, or where someone is able to look at materials and see themselves, and hear those shared experiences. So I think that one of the things moving forward that we're continuously, not in terms of being resilient, not just bouncing back, but bouncing forward, is that we're looking to amplify and do more of what's working and get rid of what's not working. And we know that, having that type of support, those type of materials is important to create not just change at the individual level, but also looking at where are systems and policies that need to be implemented that address the systemic and institutional racism that exists. Having hard conversations with white coats, those in the room, and calling out racism, to say that sometimes you have to be uncomfortable before you get comfortable, is important. So being honest and being transparent, at every level is important, so that the community knows that they own the narrative, and they have the support of others, allies, trusted messengers, that can go to bat, and they have resources, also in the media, to support and amplify their messages as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to Patrick.
All right, I'm gonna pick up where Stan left off at. So for me, again, some things are caught, other things are taught. And when residents have never had a voice or have never utilized the voice that they have, you have to teach them that it's okay to go into a room and not understand everything because one of the things that happens when you get in those rooms, people start throwing out acronyms, CDBG, XYZ, or something else, and you don't understand the language, right? And you have to let them know that it's okay not to understand the language. It's not okay for you to leave the room that way. And so you begin to help them to understand that to change the narrative is to help change the way people view you and see you. Make sure that they understand that you're there and that you're fully present and that you're fully capable, right? Sometimes that may require having someone work with them through technical assistance or capacity building efforts to try to help residents begin to take ownership of their narrative, right? Some of it is they just need to know that somebody believes in them and believe that they have something of value to say and that they bring to the table. So I'm saying we build. Whatever we do, we build. And what we really need to build is bridges. We need to build more bridges, less walls. More bridges, less walls. My mom used to always tell me, it's easy. Don't burn a bridge. Just walk. Don't burn a bridge that you can walk across. Sometimes you don't get it all in a day, but you come back the next day and you go for more. Again, I know incremental change is not something that I really care for. My last Dr. King quote to everybody who counted. So one of the things that Dr. King is always quoted as saying is he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And that's Patrick every day of the week. I want change to happen now. But let's be real with this. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. And I always add another word in, slowly. I think that is where we are, that change happens slowly, but it happens. And sometimes we have to just take the steps that we can take until we can take bigger steps. And so at the end of the day, my goal to residents and anyone who allows me to get in their space, and the other thing is, and let me just say this, that those who are up front have to learn how to lead from the middle and lead from behind. We have to allow the residents to make their mistakes, to learn, just like everybody else does. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay not to get it right, but it's not okay not to try. And so I've learned to lead from the middle and lead from behind, so that at the end of the day, when my time is up or when I'm called home, that the residents still have the wherewithal to go forward with me, but more importantly, without me.
Thank you, Patrick. Marcel, Kelly?
I actually do have a story. So when I was younger, I was at a Burger King, and this woman was next to me, and in front of me was a guy who had a Nazi swastika on the back of his head. It didn't offend me because I was like, well, this guy has a right to do that. And if I say something, maybe I'll just drag him to the, if you will, further side of racism. Until he kept his volume. And I said, ma'am, he's not bothering me. That's his right to say so. And this guy turned to me and said, thank you for understanding that. And he had that tattoo because unfortunately he made some bad decisions when he was younger, but he keeps that as a reminder. And I think about that because imagine if I was an antagonist to him. It's like, oh my God, you guys are racist. You know what you did. You shouldn't be allowed in public. But he's not wearing that with pride. That's his, if you will, his cane mark, his sin. And he wants to tell people he would love to get rid of it. But, let's be honest, getting rid of a tattoo on the back of your head it's not going to look pretty. And I had a nice conversation with him, and he, was trying to do better for the community. He know what he did was wrong, but when you're in that environment, if you will, where you're taught hate, 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 that's all you know. And with Patrick and Stan talking about building bridges, that's what I always try to do. I understand people may come from different backgrounds and they look at me and they just see me as a Black guy. But I've always asked people who are racist towards me, what did I do to offend you? I don't know if anyone's familiar with Daryl Davis, the guy who talked to 200 KKK members and convinced them to give up the hood. It's something I live by. Instead of just chastising them because they may, if you will, be on the wrong side, maybe just talk to them as if I was human, show them I was human, and I treat them as a human. They'll understand that I'm not there to change their mind and make them do different things. I just want to be at the same table, offer the same things, the same food, the same opportunity. And that's worked way more than just screaming at a person, because no one likes to be screamed at. I think anybody remembers when they were younger and their mom called their full name. The first thing they did was hide. No one was, yes, mother, what conversation would you like to have today? Everybody ran and hid because they knew trouble was coming. Yelling doesn't accomplish anything except for making enemies. Instead, absorbing what a person says, then ask them, why do you feel that way, is way easier and way better than yelling and screaming.
Powerful words, Marcel. Thank you very much. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm going to lead behind Patrick when he talked about elevating the voices, because I'm a strong proponent about passing the mic. But guess what? The microphone can be amplified and you have your own volume. And I think many times when the community is feeling heard and seen, you have no idea what can be brought forth as it relates to the wisdom and knowledge from the community itself. And I think many times when we, like Patrick talked about, stepping in the middle and stepping back, as leaders, we don't always have to be in the front. We can allow the residents to lead that space in place, to say, okay, we got some ideas that we want to work out, but do you think this is feasible to do? And I'm going to go back to common language. When everybody is speaking the same language, there's a clear understanding of, I'm not trying to use my doctorate to say I'm a little more academic than you are. I'm here as an individual for the health of the community and to hear your thoughts and ideas, not take over the conversation, not run it, but ensure that your voice is elevated. I don't know why, as he was talking, it made me think about if you were walking around with your own personal karaoke machine, you control the volume. I can't cut it off. Denise can't cut it off. Patrick can't cut it off. Nobody on here could cut off my own individual volume. So when residents have that clear understanding of that they control the narrative and their voice is needed, I go back to, I wrote a document on changing the narrative around housing. As a single parent, I figured out, okay, somebody didn't want to tell me the rules of the game as it relates to housing. Guess what? I figured out how to learn the rules of the game. And because I did figure that out, now I get to work with the community to say, wait a minute, did you know this was happening? No, I didn't. But how about the more educated the community becomes? I saw somebody put in the chat about education and educating the community. When you think about that, you get to be a little bit dangerous. Because the thing about it is, there is a better understanding of how people can communicate effectively within their community.
Thank you, Kelly. I know we are running out of time. We only have 4 minutes, but I want to honor a question that was put in the chat. And the question is, how do you manage these conversations when representing an organization that might not openly support or be outspoken about the reality of the stories shared? I don't know who wants to take a quick stab at responding to that question.
Yeah, I saw that Devonna put that out there. Devonna, here's what you're going to get from Patrick. Stay employed. If you don't have enough money to take care of yourself, don't go lose your job trying to run off in front of everybody. Stay gainfully employed until your opportunity to lead comes. And then when it does come, when those conversations come up, just do it in a manner based on where people are. Sometimes you just have to spoon feed stuff. They're not ready for a full course meal. Give them the little that you have, keep it moving, but please stay employed. Don't give up your job for the sake of a thought. Just stay employed.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else quickly?
Well, I would like to go what Patrick said. I completely agree. I understand that everybody's voice wants to be heard, but we have to understand that sometimes feeding people, as Patrick started, even just starting a small conversation outside of work while working is way better, because no one is going to accept if you're a boss, your employee comes up to you and asks all these demands. You're just an employee, but you stay at the job. You work, you get into a supervisor position or HR, you start making changes on the inside. Because what I've learned, if you will, being a Black American trying to change the mental health, it's really hard to get people to change their voice or change their ideas from the outside. You know, if I try to go, let's just say to Banner and say, hey, you know, we need to do more for Black communities, they're not going to listen because I'm on the outside. I have to work my way in, start spoon feeding people what ideas I want to have. And then when I have the ability to make change, that's when I strike. I don't strike when the iron's cold. I got to strike when the iron's hot, when they go, hey, Marcel knows what he's talking about. He's been saying this for a year. We need to make the change. He's been saying it for years, which means it's important, versus me just saying it one day out of nowhere. You have to ensure that your sword is nice and sharp, so that way you can maybe hand it off to the next generation to keep the fight going.
Can I just add, Charmaine, real quickly? I agree with my colleagues.
Sure.
I agree with my colleagues in terms of meeting, as we meet people where they're at, we have to meet organizations where they're at, and change takes time. In addition, if you have the motivation and aspiration, create your own table, bring your own chair, develop your own meal. In addition to while you're sustaining, what I'm saying, your position within the existing entity. So don't step out on faith and be willing to create your own platform, your own table, bring your own chair, cook your own meal, and invite those who have a shared mission and vision and similarity to you to the table where they have, decision-making power and voice as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you. Kelly, I don't know if you have like 5 quick seconds, if you wanted to add anything to this.
As they were talking, I'm going to chime in with my colleagues to say one band, one sound, because you think about there are people who are creating these tables as Stan shared about, but they're coming together with a one particular agenda to move the needle forward. And so I'm in total agreement with what everyone has shared thus far.
I know you'll all agree with me that it has been a fantastic panel, leading us in a fantastic discussion. Clearly, it is not a cannot a one.
Well, folks, it looks like we may have lost Charmaine. Please do a couple of things before we leave. In the chat, there's a Survey Monkey poll for you to take. Please answer honestly and give constructive feedback. Come on, Charmaine, you back now.
I know. I think technology is saying, oh, I think you should be done so quickly. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, what an amazing panel. 2 quick things, please. There is a survey that we want you to fill out in terms of how you found this webinar. Please look out for further notices about the upcoming webinars that we're going to be having in the next ones in this series. And then finally, in my opening comments, I had mentioned about the 1619 project. There, it's actually showing on Hulu starting today. There are new sessions that are gonna be shown. So if you have Hulu, hopefully it will also get on YouTube eventually, but if you have Hulu, please check out the 1619 project presentation that's happening. Again, Melanie just put in the chat about, for those who want the DEI credit, she put a link in. And Melanie, how are we gonna get people to access the survey?
So the survey will show up behind in a different browser window. I put the link in the chat. And then, of course, this session has been recorded and will be available on the ATP website later on our previous webinars page.
We would be thank you, Melanie. We would be remiss if we did not tell our great collaborator in this, the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, and all that they provide in making this possible. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Chris, for your amazing support throughout all the webinar series that we have been doing. Again, to our panelists, we cannot say thank you enough for your time and your wisdom and your insight. Please applaud them or put up one of those emojis that applaud them. And for those who joined us, thank you for sitting in with us. Thank you for those who put in their comments in the section. Clearly, you were actively engaged and active listeners. Again, thank you so much. Stay tuned for our next webinar in this series. Again, thank you all. Take care. Let's keep the fight going to make sure that our stories get told the way we want them to be told and not to be co-opted by others, because as the title of this says, those who tell the story are the ones who shape the destiny. Thank you again. Take care. Bye.